Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the show. On today's show, what if you could read an AI's mind sentence by sentence, see it dash off quickly drafts, then watch a large model tidy the logic? What if a model handed its notes to you, waiting for red ink before it moved on? What if each of these steps pulled live evidence from the web, turning guesswork into ground fact? This is a welcome to the era of chain of thought. We've talked about this before, but today we're talking about three types of chain of thought: speculative chains, collaborative chains, and retrieval powered chains. Three breakthroughs, one goal: faster, clearer, more transparent reasoning. So 2 years ago, we were only asking models to think step by step. Today, those steps sprint, branch, and cite sources in real time. How did we get here? What's coming next? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. This is the Daily AI Show. Today is May 9th, 2025. Once again, we have a full boat. We're only missing Aaron, but we will get him back eventually. Welcome everybody to the show. Before we get going, just want to let you know, since I was just reminded last night as we were having our meeting and looking at some data, that quite a few of you reach us and are not subscribers, followers. It's very, very possible, based on the numbers and analytics we see, that this is the first time you've ever seen this group. So just a quick reminder that you can find us here Monday through Friday, every single weekday at 10 a.m. Eastern. And today is episode 460. So we've been doing this for a little while. And if you enjoy great conversations, being a fly on the wall, being part of the conversation, if you like, about where we are in the world of AI. Today, we're talking about chain of thought. Yesterday, we talked about evidence-based AI and a whole lot more. So if you want to join us live for the conversation, come on over to YouTube and you can be in the comments and actually share your thoughts live with the show. If you're catching us at another time, that's totally fine as well. But you can join us in the community. So you can go to the dailyishowcommunity.com and sign up for our Slack community. It's free. We also have newsletters that go out. You can go to our website, thedailyishow.com, and get signed up for that as well. Also free. So lots of different ways to interact with the show. This certainly isn't meant to be just a one-way, discussion. We love it when you guys are in the comments and everything else. So with that said, let's talk about this. And so what I did just to kind of kick this off, but then I want to throw it to whoever else wants to dig in a little bit more here. But I was curious for the evolution of chain of thought. I'm obviously familiar. We have talked about chain of thought quite a bit on this show, but I was like, well, are there some benchmarks over the last 2 years? I didn't get a lot back, but I think this is maybe helpful to just kind of get going before we dive into specific types of chain of thought. Let's just step back and talk about chain of thought. So, going back to 2022, this is some notes I got back, like we et al., so the source there, showing that adding explicit step-by-step reasoning in terms of saying, let's think step by step, unlocked stronger performance. So for any of us that have been messing around with LLM prompting for over 2 years, you probably remember going through this. You remember a LinkedIn post or somebody saying, hey, in some chat thread that you are, if you say this, if you tell it to slow down and think step by step, you actually get better answers a lot of the times. That was sort of the initial that I remember part of this. And I'd love to hear your guys' feedback on it. 2023, we started having extensions that were exploring different like branching paths, which were more like tree of thought. So we started having extensions that were taking advantage of that with prompting. And we also started talking about like zero-shot prompting tricks that we could do. Then as we moved into 2024 last year, the focus shift to users control and transparency, where we're spawning more interactive frameworks like collaborative chain of thought, which we're going to talk about today. And this year, obviously, a lot has been around the reasoning models and being able to go back and look. Now we've been able to do this for several months, be able to look at the reasoning steps, whether it's O3, DeepSeek, other ones that obviously do similar things in Perplexity, where you can actually see the different pieces and parts to it. And I would say O3 maybe being the leader there because, at least in the pro version, as Carla demonstrated for us a few months back, that it will adjust its chain of thought as it was doing the research. And to me, that happened to be like the highest order we've seen of this. But you guys correct me if you think I'm wrong on that. That seems to be the most intelligent version that I've personally seen of just chain of thought as we know it inside of O3. But have you guys seen anything different than that?
Well, I don't want to challenge O3's preeminence when it comes to reasoning, but I am going to challenge the whole idea that there are actually iterative sequential steps happening in an LLM when it's doing chain of thought or when it's responding to a chain of thought prompt. And so here's the thesis. This has been a really interesting exploration for me because it's challenging my own understanding of what's happening in the emergence of apparent intelligence, as evidenced by the ability to, in effect, mimic human reasoning steps. So here's the question I posed to one of the most, transparent reasoning models, GenSpark. I said, I would like you to explain to me, just a second here, how an LLM processes a chain of thought prompt. Intuitively, for a human, this involves iterative processes, which require short-term memorization of the planned sequence, intermediate deliberations on the results of each step. It's the import of that to the final response, maybe even a change of plan in the middle of that, revising short-term memory, and then ultimately a separate assembly of the results into a solution. But that doesn't easily fit with the idea of putting tokens through a deep neural network, unless to accomplish chain of thought, there is an orchestration mechanism that governs this iterative sequencing of inference runs when prompted to think step by step. Okay, so the answer is, this is a simulation. It's an illusion of sequential reasoning. It's enabled by autoregressive text generation. And that's what transformer models do. So here's how a model generates text that seems to look like the thing is thinking. And by the way, one of the very first things that it does in this simulation is to put in front of you a progress indicator that says thinking. But it's really just processing all of the prompt and the context in the following way, which is the difference between just sending a prompt through the deep neural network and autoregressive text generation. So the model takes the input prompt as the initial context. It predicts the most likely next token based on this context. And now the step that's important, it adds that new token to the context. And then it looks back with the attention mechanism at all of those prior tokens, including the one it just generated. And it repeats those steps. So with each prediction now also considering all previously generated tokens. So this, combined with the attention mechanism, creates the convincing illusion of step-by-step reasoning, despite fundamental differences from human cognition. And it provided me with a nice little table of how human reasoning works and how LLM autoregression works. But all in all, what this is saying to me is the model isn't truly thinking or planning in the human sense. It's predicting the most likely next tokens given all the previous tokens. And because it's been trained on human written text that follows logical patterns, the autoregressive prediction naturally captures patterns of reasoning.
I have questions. I have questions. I understand what you're saying. I think basically every step is giving the previous outputs as additional new inputs, correct? So if we have a 5-step process, by the time we get to step 5, it knows everything that was in steps that came out of steps 1 through 4. Right. Correct?
And it was smart enough because it was trained well to know what the correct first step was, right? So if it does the first step right, then using that step as new part of the context, it's going to simulate the steps of reasoning. And again, this, when I look at what's happening with web search and it says, okay, now I'm going to go search for this and I'm going to search for that, that seems to be a different process from what's described as simple autoregressive text generation. So I'm not absolutely convinced that there aren't methods that have been coupled together with an LLM that orchestrate, as I suggested, is the intuitive conclusion that we would have, a sequence of little deep researches that go about solving something, and then that gets added to the context. So, but all in all, even if it's going to use external context retrieval, whether that's from a RAG system or from a web search, it's still nonetheless processing it all in a single sequence.
In Operator, when we see sort of the mouse get to a dead end in the maze and it backtracks to maybe step 2 because going down one path was a dead end. Carl has shown this months ago with setting up for swim lessons, right? For his I think it was daughter. You know, it tries, right? And it says, okay. And then you'll see, it says something in there like, I couldn't click on the link. I'm now going to try to do this. Is that for our benefit? Or is that because those tokens then serve a purpose of informing where it retracts back to in the process, Andy, and then restarts the tree? Because it backs up and then it starts going down a different path, essentially, right? Is that, if I have that right? So is that what you're saying? Is that for us, the humans,
I think that
or is it helpful?
I think that agents have an orchestration mechanism, right? So I want to distinguish between, okay, here's an LLM that's been prompted to think step by step, and that follows the path that I just described. It's just a single run, but it's a really complex, recursive addition of each additional token to the context in order to capture the step-by-step thinking that it says it's doing. But it's just predictable, like it's a prediction engine. It is predicting the next tokens. In the case of an agent, I think there's something else. And we even have like mixture of agents, right? So there's an agent probably that's responsible for managing the interaction with the web browser, right? And actually clicking on things. And it's feeding information to another LLM that's doing this chain of thought process and understands what the context is from all previous steps, because it's been fed each of those in turn. But somehow it's aggregating those things in a kind of short-term memory in its context window in a way that isn't exactly similar to what I described as autoregressive text. That's my guess, but that's just for further exploration.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, how does this mechanism actually work that gives us this appealing appearance of a live, active reasoner taking multi-branch conditional steps in order to get to a solution?
You know, you mentioned the status bar or the thinking part of it, and you know, there's many apps that have been developed that purposely put that on the screen because it's been proven that putting a thinking or spinning wheel or any variation of that makes the time actually seem shorter to us versus it just being a blank screen, right? Because if it just stopped and it wasn't, and you're like, I don't know what, and it was the exact same 30 seconds. But on one of them, you have thinking and it's showing you what you want to see, which is look at it go. Look at all these steps that it's going in there. That's more, I think that is more appealing to us. Even early on with LLMs, we saw, well, at least I heard, I can't prove this, that when they were doing more of the DOS line by line, you know, the green screen ANSI line by line that we used to have, that some of that was intentional because it gave the impression of being of the second of the moment because it was predicting the next sentence. And of course, that would be better. It made the system seem smarter early on than if it had just plopped it all on the screen all at one time. It's a really interesting idea how like these things are more for us. And that's kind of one of the things I'm hearing from you, Andy, is like perhaps some of this is for us, but not necessarily 100% necessary for the chain of thought. I don't know Carl, you brought this, you brought this to us as far as an idea, not to say that, you're the foremost expert or anything on it, but what was the inspiration for like, when you saw this? A lot of it was shared on Hugging Face. By the way, we're going to talk about 3 because we couldn't possibly talk about all 10, but there's 10 different chain of thought ones. I don't know about all of them. The 3 that we're going to talk about all had about 47-page research papers associated with them. So there's a lot of information and research out there on Archive and other places as far as chain of thought. But anyway, back to you, Carl.
Well, it kind of ties back into our show yesterday a little bit, where I was talking about, I was talking about like Jan LeCun, talking about we need a new system that if we're going to go move forward, is the large language model the right thing, it has it capped out of what it's supposed to do, right? So you still have chain of thought, you have reasoning, you have all these variations, but where does that lead? And is there a finite point where it's done? So that was really the thought of kind of like my thinking around this. Because yes, we have reasoning, and yes, I when I do prospect meetings, I show for a lot of people. Sometimes it's like I don't feel right saying it's quote unquote thinking. That's why I always say it's quote unquote thinking, because I was like, it's not really thinking.
Right.
But in this kind of audience, I can't describe it any other way without losing them. So I was like, yeah, it's literally quote unquote thinking. And you can see my favorite one is Grok. Of all the ones, I love how Grok they put it out. I don't like OpenAI because it's a summary. But I do like Grok. Like Grok and DeepSeek, they're just like sentences upon sentences about just like it's like a verbal for very, very, very it's like verbal diarrhea of all the things that they're thinking about. So, but what Andy was mentioning was it's usually what's in my head when I'm looking at it. And it's like, well, it's not really thinking. It's kind of doing this and this and this and this and this, but it's just kind of funny to see it that way. I do think though, when you have GenSpark, you have Manus, you have I think Browser Agent as an open source model. There's another one I was trying, like Pointer, and Claude computer use too. What my question is, like, as more complex the tasks that we have, right? If you actually took some of those, it's easy to book a travel engagement. It's like, if you think about it, it's like go to website, look at this, do this. We've had like RPAs for a long time, robotic process automations. What happens when you need to do multiple, the whole goal is to have an agent go off and do something for you. But when we're talking, I'm looking at it from a work perspective, when it has to go open one system, do this, go into another system, do this, and then reason what happens between the two systems and come back with something else, that starts becoming more complex and complex and complex. And what I have found using deep research, O3, Manus, GenSpark, there's a certain point where the context window is actually important, because it needs to do several different things at the same time and refer back to something to complete the next task, and has to revert back to the answer it provided way back to complete the next task. I was trying to give it like this complex contact list review and research piece that for a client. There is a point where it stops. So that's my question, is how there has to be a point where chain of thought doesn't work, because it'll reach its limit. I just don't. I think I found that limit, especially if you go to GenSpark, O3, and Manus, the limit's about 100. Hold on, how much time do we have? Okay, I don't want to go into what I was tasked to do is pretty complex, but my thing was, it reaches a limit of, in this case, 120 to 140 contacts, which I asked it to do, and in batches of 40. Anything more than 40, 45, it stops working reliably, and it's like hit or miss. So that's what I've been finding. So I'm wondering if that, from a reasoning chain of thought, there's a point of diminishing returns. You're giving it too many instructions, or the task is so complex that I can't do it anymore.
Yeah. Which I would imagine. I mean, that is got to be the case, right? I mean, there's context window limits. There's still memory limits. We know that Beth, you mentioned it. Beth, you mentioned it yesterday. Beth and M yesterday about recency bias and how prompts are when you have long chains or long prompt windows, that they often will look at the more recent parts of that back and forth with the person versus maybe something that happened at the top. I mentioned that I run into that quite often with Claude, that you can actually kind of see it happening. It's like, it's good, it's good, it's good. The other place I can see it is when I'm working on putting up the show descriptions for like YouTube and Spotify every day. So we get done with the show, Beth does some post-processing. She puts them in a folder for me. I take them and I edit the videos using DaVinci. The last part of that is putting the show descriptions inside of YouTube, right? And it's got timestamps and things like that in it. And it's pretty obvious. I could use the same chat window for probably 20 shows easily, right? Just do the next one, do that. I don't even have to say anything. I just go, here's the transcript. Whoa, it puts it out there. Here's the transcript, puts it out there. And then like from one to the next, there'll just be an obvious degradation of quality of content. And then you'll just start seeing the LLM do some really screwy things where it just doesn't seem to understand what the role is. And that's obviously the clear indicator that it's time to start a brand new chat, give it the instructions, move forward again, or put it in a custom GPT. Okay, I want to hear from Jimmy. I want to hear from you, Beth. But I also want to make sure, as far as the show topic today, that we do get into these three different models. So I don't know if you guys maybe want to jump into one or the other, but let me just say what they are. We want to talk about speculative chain of thought. And that really highlight on that one, but we'll dive deeper, is you're giving it a small draft model, which rapidly writes several candidate thought chains. And then a larger target model checks the drafts, keeps the best one, fixes the errors. Okay, so that's speculative chain of thought. There's more to that. It's supposed to help with latency. Collaborative or interactive chain of thought is kind of like what I was saying in the intro, which is like the model will show me a number of reasoning steps, me, the user. After each pass, it gives me the option to revise, delete, or merge any of the steps. So instead of it just saying that thinking, next step, next step, next step, it's decidedly slower. But the idea is that I'm much more human in the loop, and I can correct the path a little bit. To me, this is analogous to what I've always said is a good analogy for, the intern idea that they come in the room. I can choose to only set to check back in with that intern at 5 p.m. for a set of tasks, filing, whatever it might be. And there's a good possibility that me and the intern, despite no fault of the intern, by the way, just my chain of thought instructions, that we've diverged maybe around noon, and it went another 5 hours. And now at the 5 o'clock, we have a problem on our hands. Or I can check in every hour and I can go, where are we? Let me help recorrect. Let us get us back on the same path, right? So that's more of the collaborative side of it. And finally, chain of thought RAG is the goal here is to boost accuracy and reliability on hard tasks by wiring retrieval and program style rigor into the chain of thought. So here's how it works. Experts sketch a coarse decision tree for the domain. An LLM decomposes that tree into a knowledge graph, then uses retrieval-augmented generation, that's the RAG, to pull relevant cases for each node. Reasoning is executed as a, quote, pseudo program, giving clearer logic than plain natural language, with the payoff being somewhere, based on the paper, 4 to 23% point accuracy jumps over prior CoT methods on 9 public data sets, but strong results on domain-specific benchmarks as well. So those are the highlight of the three. But Jimmy, Beth, or anybody else, is there one specific that you found the most interesting, or you guys want to sort of dive deeper into? That was a point to Jimmy, I think.
Okay. So, all right. So just to be clear, like Brian said earlier, this is based off of an article or paper from Hugging Face, and it's a listing of what these current evolutions of chain of thought are. And so we picked these three as a good starting point. I didn't discuss this with any of anybody else, but I would definitely want to go through all 10 eventually. So, but based on these three, I think my main takeaway here is, number one, seeing that chain of thought has evolved to a point to where now we're seeing there is growth within the method and framework itself, which does expand and gives us room to grow and evolve in terms of what kind of either specific scales that we want to work with, or places that we can where we can see growth in in AI and processing and things like that. But the ones that the one that interests me the most is the collaborative, right? I tend to look at an end goal for whatever I'm building or trying to solve for a problem or anything like that, where I know what the end result should be, right? Whether it's data collection and I want to draw certain insights, or if it's the creation process, if I'm, making a video or a film or anything like that, I know what the end result is generally going to be. I mean, through the process that could, change and evolve and things like that. But I kind of know already what I want it to be. I want this to be a 1-hour video, and it's going to talk about this and this and this. So what do I need to achieve that? And I need it by a certain time, right? So you just create a work back schedule. It's the same kind of thing when you're building out any of these processes. Now, the collaborative chain of thought, where I can have input along the way with the AI as it's reasoning out these possibilities, is really exciting, because that means I don't have to wait for it. Because currently you put your question, your query, and then it does all of its thinking and then gets back to you. And then you say, okay, well, let's explore this further. Now, with the collaborative part, if I can stop it once it reaches a certain thing, like maybe I didn't think of something and it found something that I didn't realize, I can pop in there and go, let's explore from here. This right. Now has a higher priority for me. Yeah, branch it. Yeah, exactly. Fork that thought process and let's explore this. Save A, but let's explore B, and then just go down that road. And I think from the creative process, that is an amazing capability. A lot of times we'll use AI as, something to bounce an idea off of, a collaborative partner. Beth's famous for using it to ask her questions about stuff, which, that's a technique I've integrated into my process. And so having an expansion upon that is super useful for me. So being able to branch off and explore those paths that I would normally have to have a one-to-one, kind of response as it is now, that's probably, of the three, those the most exciting for me, because I love the ability to expand into directions that I might have not thought of before.
And Jimmy, I feel like this is I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm just going to say this makes, honestly, not surprised at all to hear you say this. And this is the reason why. I think you've been really open and honest on the show. I mean, 460 shows, we've gotten to know each other, and our audience has too. But something I have heard you say pretty consistently is, I don't want AI to go off and do this on my behalf. I want to be part of the solution. I want to be part of this. I'm not interested in, maybe an AI taking on this thing. I want it to stop and ask me first. I want to make sure that I am the decider of this. So and I don't want to paraphrase for you. Please say how you would, but in hearing you, not surprised at all for you to say, hey, collaborative really speaks to me, because I think it really speaks to your personality and what you've kind of demonstrated and said, hey, this is where I feel like AI fits in my life, which is that it is a human plus AI process. I want to be part of it. I'm not asking it to go off on its own and do things, at least at this point. Maybe there's a future where you're so confident of the type of chain of thought that's going on that you choose that you no longer have to be involved in steps 1, 2, 3, 4. You're fine with it going to step 6 because it's proven its worth, right? I think that could happen. Yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, that this sounds like something you would be in favor of on it. I don't know. Does that hit for you? I mean,
yeah, totally. It checks the box for me. Yeah, totally.
Beth, any thoughts on this? I know you're kind of working in the background too, but any thoughts as far as the other two, like the chain of thought RAG? Actually, Andy, I'd love to hear you on that one too. But chain of thought RAG or the speculative chain of thought?
Actually, I'm going to say a couple of things. First, this show was my idea. So
I thought it was Carl.
Yet another Beth idea that is credited to Carl. So we're having a theme here.
Wow. I apologize, but I thought it said, it does say, oh, you know why? Okay, Fair.
I know what it says.
It
It's
says
good.
Carl and then inspiration underneath it. Carl was the link. Inspiration is the post underneath it.
Like all the other, yeah, absolutely.
Yep, that's how I read it. So sorry,
Cool.
that's why Carl gets all the credit, but I didn't realize it.
That's not why Carl gets all the credit, but it is for this one. Just very funny.
God,
So
Jesus.
I also really love the collaborative one, and that's because basically what you're doing is improvising. What I thought was interesting actually about all three of these ideas is that they have non-chain of thought corollaries, right? So the draft, we can do the first one, the speculative chain of thought, where it drafts a couple of paths to go as they're thinking, is something that you can sort of replicate with ChatGPT, because you're going to ask for O to suggest 3 paths, right? And then you're going to switch models to O3, or you're going to use O4 mini or one of the lesser reasoning models to suggest the paths. And then what happens in speculative chain of thought is that then the smarter reasoning, right? It does its little work. The sous chef is out there doing the stuff, and then the real chef comes in and says, okay, this is the way that I want to put that together, or I want to do my vegetables in a different way and I'm going to make it my own. You could technically kind of do that with ChatGPT or Perplexity or something that allows you to switch a model within the same thread. There's less reason, I think, to do it that way, but it is possible. With the collaborative reasoning, Gemini's flavor of deep research shows you its plan first and lets you edit it before then it goes into its own deep research. The difference between the collaborative, the real collaborative thing, is that Gemini only lets you like have a voice up front, right? Like, I don't want you to do that. This is more important to me, blah, 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 blah. Then it goes off, then it comes back. When you do it in this kind of collaborative chain of thought, you can pause all the way through, right? And have another chat conversation in the middle and decide together where the next step is, which is very exciting, I think. And for me personally, the RAG one was really interesting because it's using pseudocode. And we haven't talked very much about pseudocode, but pseudocode is basically where you just write code, the text that sounds like code, and and AI does the functions because it knows what you mean, which lets you do really interesting things in terms of writing things to memory, or like getting somewhere without having to do a lot of context about what you want it to do. You just give it something that sounds like a function and it does it. So I'm very interested in the RAG piece because it lets you have like a really deep context and knowledge-based conversation without necessarily setting up like a RAG-based chatbot or doing a bunch of vector embedding or those sorts of things. You really are kind of like what we were talking the other day about gaslighting your AI for fun and profit. It's a little bit of that, right? Like, I'm going to tell you that you are like the smartest RAG. I'm going to give you like little funky functions that like sound really good, and then you're going to give me this stuff back. And it is a little bit of functioning like a bigger car. I don't know, right? Like it's a little tiny engine, has a little trouble on hills, but it's like it's painted out as though it's brilliant and it's got a really great stereo, that kind of thing. Cool. Yeah.
So let me jump in now and just say, let's remember that the reasoning models have been trained on both real written examples of humans laying out their step-by-step reasoning, and they've also been trained on synthetic data that is designed to train them in what good sort of sequential explorations look like. So that's how they're very capable of developing that plan right up front, because they have lots of pre-training for that. Now, I think it's interesting to look at the collaborative model, because when it does it is prompted to do a chain of thought approach, but it's instructed to stop after each step and consult with the human. What that's doing is that's allowing the addition of more context than is in the pre-training and or in its previous generated responses to be added to the full context now of the deliberation. And so the collaborative approach is solving the problem of it all being very predictive and based only on, you know, the previously generated tokens. And instead, suddenly there's a new sentence that comes in from Junmi that says, here's what I want you to do next. Now that gets added to the stream of context, not stream of consciousness, but stream of context that the model owns at that point in time. I want to use another example. It's a variation of chain of thought called self-ask. And so here's the simple way that self-ask works. So you prompt the AI to undertake a series of steps that's like chain of thought, but do it in the fashion, and you can provide it with examples of asking a question and then answering the question one at a time. So it's a given instruction that's going to create a set of questions. All of those questions and the sub-questions should be relevant to the objective, whatever the prompt is saying we need to solve here. But the first step is I want you to create the list of questions, just like it's making a plan for a chain of thought series. But now each question, I want you to actually answer the question. Now, what happens when that is done, when you ask it to do the self-ask method, is it generates the context of not only the questions, but the answers as part of that chain of thought, sort of emerging flow of deliberation, simulated deliberation. And that's proven, it's a method of chain of thought, that's proven to significantly improve the responses and the accuracy and relevance of the responses if you give it that task of creating a set of questions in a logical sequence that one question builds upon the other. So it's just a slightly different model of chain of thought, like step, plan this out step by step, but I want you to phrase it in the form of a question followed by your own answer to it. Imagine combining that now with collaborative. So yeah, do the self-ask, but now I want you to stop after each self-ask. I'm going to read your answer, and then I'm going to give you more guidance about each one. Now remember that each of those originally planned ones is already in the context, but the original plan, the one where it thought about what, let's say it was going to generate 8 questions in pursuit of this objective. What I don't understand is how does it remember what the 6th question is when it's finished with number 5, unless it put that original generation of the questions in their full sequence into some kind of memory. And that implies this RAG technology that's implied by the chain of thought RAG approach, that's somehow capturing one of the intermediate outputs of the model in order to be able to refer to that.
And that's when it gets really interesting, I think, Andy, because that we don't know that that's true, right? If it's a predictive engine, then what we perceive as putting into memory is that being the more predicted answer, right? The higher predicted answer. One of the conversations that I had in prepping for the show with, I think I had it with ChatGPT, was, does AI have the ability to focus on just part and then out to the whole, right? Because AI has the whole context window. But we can do it with eyesight, but I think we think of it more in hearing. I can hear the whole restaurant, but then I can try to focus in and hear my partner on the other side of the table.
That's attention. That's right.
Yes. And we can do that, right? And all you need is attention, but that doesn't necessarily mean what right? Like that doesn't necessarily mean with AI what it means with us. what I got back was, yes, AI is paying attention to particular things. It has more weight associated with certain parts of the context. And we see this, that if you've ever asked, please use a metaphor, you need to like smoke bomb your whole computer to get the metaphor out of the out of what it's going to give you, because you said metaphor once and it wants to tell you that it really understands. It loves metaphors as much as you do. But I think that we're not really great at understanding the way that attention within context works in a way that feels to us like it's putting it in memory. Just because if we had to keep track of it, we would have to put it in memory, because we can't keep all of that context in the front of our head.
On this subject of memory and how does it happen, how does that assist reasoning? Because we as humans believe that at least short-term memory is necessary in order for you to follow your own set of planned instructions or conceive of new ones. You got to remember what the prior step was and then generate a new one. Let's remember that in most cases, when you're doing a chain of thought prompt, you also have a chat history. And that chat history becomes a native part of the context for the model for any subsequent query that you give it in that session. So what I would think of doing, let's take the self-ask approach. I should remember, if I'm going to do a chain of thought request to a model, I should ask it to lay out the full chain of thought sequence to me first, and then start with step one, right? So put it all out there, what you've developed, and why? Because I want that in the context. I wanted to be able to remember that. And this is familiar to me because when I'm working with a coding agent, either Gemini, or I'm working between Gemini and Lovable at the moment, I'm sometimes mind boggled by how well they can, or ill in the case of Lovable, it can follow a complex set of instructions, right? But then, if I give it a set of instructions from one model, let's take Gemini, and give it over to the other one, it seems like I don't know how this model is ever going to keep track of all the things that it's being requested to do here in a sequence that is well defined by Gemini, and it wants a Lovable to do it in this sequence and only in this sequence and contingent on the results of a certain step and so on. How is it going to remember that? And frankly, sometimes it doesn't, right? It doesn't get that instruction following. It hasn't been tuned well enough to follow those instructions exactly. But nonetheless, those instructions are still in the context. And what's frustrating with the coding agents is that even though it's up there, from 30 minutes ago, it's no longer in the working context of the agent. You give it another request to pursue this other objective, and it's lost everything that it was assigned to do before.
But
so memory is really important here.
Well, and here's the other issue to it, Andy. The language model, in an attempt to please you, the user, doesn't admit up to that. So it would be much better in chain of thought if it would simply say, I no longer have that in my memory. That would actually be phenomenal, because you would have insight and you go, oh, okay, that's not what happens. In fact, Sinead Boville, the futurist who often talks about AI, and she does wonderful content on LinkedIn, just recently talked about that. She wasn't talking about chain of thought. She was actually talking about how that reinforcement method with AI can lead people to believe that they're gods, to that believe that get disconnected with family, because they've got this like continuous reinforcement mechanism of this AI that's simply saying like, yep, you're right. You're right. That's a great point. You are right about that. And it does become problematic. She was talking about that at the extreme ends of that. But I think her point is valid, which comes back to like chain of thought. If we don't get a good insight that it at some point no longer has the context that it needs to have to move forward, that's not often what happens. And it is very hard to catch. So sometimes you see what appears to be great reasoning, but it took a left turn at Albuquerque. It's a little off its rocker. And it doesn't appear that way. And it can be very difficult to catch. And whether we call that hallucinations or not, I'm not really sure if that falls into hallucinations. I think it's just a product of these models, as we saw with 4.0 and their recent rollback, perhaps trying a little too hard to please the end user, when what we really need is not only logic, but accuracy. And knowing that what we're getting back, and understanding what's behind it. And I guess that goes into our I'm not going to say his name, Anthropic, because Beth was up there wrong. I was about to say his name too, and I'm sure I'm right, but I'm not going to say it because
Dario.
So I just wanted to reiterate, I completely agree, Brian. I would love the feature that says either it just gets to a point and instead of trying to placate me, right, instead of trying to go past that level, it just gives me some sort of warning. I'm not sure. Or can you tell me about that, some more, or something like that, or a feature that says go to a specified memory piece, because I'd love it that memory evolves to a point where either if I say something, it goes to memory, which is a separate thing, creates potentially a sub-reg system that I can go, oh, remember that thing, or go to memory module 3. That's where I already laid out the basic premise. So you don't have to remember it. You don't have to remember it from earlier in the conversation. It's like memory 3. Okay, boom, bring that in. Those kinds of things, while they're not as from a user experience kind of thing, you do need to have, you do have to look at it more like your current computing nature. Bring in this when I say this. So the user experience is not as ideal as imagined. I think that goes to overall just better results. And I think all of us are more results oriented. Give me the mode, whatever it is. I don't want smooth user experience. I want working user experience. Those kinds of things.
But it's not self-aware, right? In order to be able to do that, it would need to be self-aware. Just like when your parent has, or your partner or whoever in your life has Alzheimer's, they're not aware of what they don't know. They're just aware that they don't know something anymore, or they're not aware they don't know something anymore, right? That requires a certain level of like overall awareness.
That sounds like a real easy feature to build, right, Beth? We can get that done tomorrow.
I would say, personally, what I would prefer is that there's just like a pink overlay or a blue overlay that shows you where your context window is. So you can go up and see, right? And that's just a token thing. Like you got 10 million tokens, you got 10,000 tokens, whatever it is. Like you can count the tokens and give me the blue overlay. And now I can go back and go, oh, right. I get it.
Yes. That is a super easy implementation,
right?
Yeah, I think we talked about it. Token count. Can I have a token count switch in my chat? I mean, that alone is enough. I love the overlay. That's awesome. That way you get graphical visualization. But just give me the token count. That alone, it will be a huge upgrade.
And there is also a way, Jumi, sometimes that you can reinforce something, which is making it a variable, right? So goal equals blah, 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 blah. I can say, remember the goal, you must follow the goal. And in the same way that does with code, right? It reads that and goes, yes, okay, so I put that in. I suspect that's just like what we were saying with Andy, where that's a predicted, that changes the predicted behavior as opposed to it really pulled the tokens in and did it. But I find it helpful when I use that, when I set something as a variable.
I like your idea, Beth, for like the sliding window, the grayed out like thing, because you could visually see when things grayed out. Prior to you saying that, I was thinking of a GUI that was more like, almost like you can affect temperature, because I was thinking about what you said, Jimmy, almost if it was like a it's just the name of the type of chart, the Gant chart. right? So Gantt chart sort of shows left to right, usually across time is the metric that you're working across. And if, Jimmy, back to your point, if I could choose to pick a placard that has one of the steps and I could choose to give it more weight and move it forward in sort of a visual way, I could affect chain of thought by saying, I see what we've done to this point, and now as the human, I'm giving you feedback that this carries more weight, which would then hopefully help it start to lean and go down that path more, right? And so anyway, if it's not a Gantt chart outlet, some sort of GUI, some sort of visual interface, I'm sure if I prompted Claude, it would actually build this for me as something sort of a working model of this. But the idea that the chain of thought sits, like each piece of that sits on its own card almost, and those cards can be moved based on the weight that you would want to give it moving forward. And then it would be this sort of interactive of like, well, I move this forward. Maybe I take this one off. I don't actually want this one in the memory anymore. And so I move it to the gray zone, right? Or whatever that looks like. It gets banished, right? Excommunicated from the Gantt chart. And then, the other areas continue forward. And then there's a next iterative process. All of that is in memory. Some of it's weighted more than other parts. And then it says, okay, now this is where we are. Full stop. Back to what you're saying, Jimmy. Okay, how do you feel about this? And you go, well, slide this, slide that. Now that's obvious, much slower, laborious process. And I think this goes back to the idea, at least with the 3 examples we gave, they don't all prove to serve the same problem. Some of them are about latency. Chain of thought RAG, 4 to 23% point accuracy jumps, and it also talks about latency. Speculative chain of thought, payoff 48 to 66% faster reasoning across other benchmarks. So, of course, going on with latency. Collaborative does not mention the payoff being latency. It mentions the payoff being, encourages critical engagement, reduces blind trust and opaque answers, and supports domains where human judgment matters. So I think as we sort of like wrap this idea up, and of course, like you said, Jimmy, there's several other ones that were part of this Hugging Face article that are definitely worth digging into. Really what I see is that as we sort of move forward with chain of thought, they're starting to merge different concepts that are going to be more or less valuable depending on what your intended outcome or goal is of that chain of thought. If you just need something that's more of a reasoning through it and you don't need to slow down, you may care more about having lower latency, aka it takes less time to give you back a reasonable answer. And of course, you might want higher latency if it has something to do with math. And you might also want to be more part of that process step by step with the math to improve and ensure that the results are accurate on it, in which case you might go more with the collaborative or maybe some hybrid version like you were saying, Andy. Okay, so as we're sort of wrapping up today and wrapping up the week, I just want to remind everybody again that a couple things. Number one, you can join our community anytime. So dailyishowcommunity.com. It's a Slack community. If you enjoyed this topic, come talk about it. If you want to dig into one of the other chain of thought reasonings, bring it into the community. Let's all chat about it. We didn't have time to get to all of them today, so we just kind of picked 3, or Beth picked 3 that were the most interesting, I guess, of the list. You can also go to thedailyishow.com, our website, if you want to join and sign up for the free newsletter that goes out on Sundays. And again, like I said at the top of the show, we realize that quite a few of the people who are going to see this episode, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, here on YouTube as well, that you're not subscribed, you're not necessarily, seeing all the new episodes come in, but this is a good reminder that this is episode 460. And so we are here Monday through Friday. We've been doing this almost 2 years. I think August 7th-ish is the 2-year mark for us. So we've been doing this really consistently. In fact, we're proud of this. We haven't missed a Monday through Friday yet, barring hurricanes, national weather, holidays across the world. We have managed to put at least 2 people on, I think, every show. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. Nobody has ever had to host single, right?
Not
Is that right?
yet.
Not yet. Right. Oh, I thought so today for a second. I thought it was going to be me. So, okay, that's it for today, guys. Unless you guys have anything else to say, check out our conundrum episode that'll come out tomorrow. That is not us live. It's just a Saturday thing we do. It's always about an interesting problem that doesn't have a clear-cut answer, aka a conundrum. And it is hosted by 2 AI hosts. So it's very meta, not the company, but just meta in terms of AI. It's always a fun one. You can check out that episode. It will drop tomorrow at 10 a.m. and the newsletter will go out at 8 a.m. Eastern on Sunday morning. So that's your cutoff to get signed up. Anything else?
Yeah, if you can't, if you haven't got enough of us, you can join Junmi, Andy, and I this afternoon when we are talking about something small like the nature of reality for the Sci-Fi AI show. It is the third in our trilogy. Yeah, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, because that's the way time works. And we're a separate channel. Just go to the at the Sci-Fi AI show. And there's probably a link of it on this channel as well. Thanks. Hope to see you there.
And Beth, correct me wrong. Would we have an outro? You want to do the outro the same way we did the intro? Or do you just want to say goodbye?
Let's just say goodbye, because yep.
Bye, everybody.
Oh,
have a great weekend.
Sing along if you know the song. Yeah, here we go. Thanks. Bye.